We all remember the glorious sporting summer of London 2012. 17 days of elite sporting competition hosted here on our own shores by a capital city exhibiting confidence, kindness and above all, conditions contributing to success. Medals were being won across more sports than ever. New sporting superstars were born. The planning and the investment was paying off. But in amongst all the success, the champagne, the high-fiving and backslapping, one sport was reflecting on a poor return. Traditionally, the highlight of week one, the Aquatic Centre, where the Union flag remained in the cupboard, the God Save the Queen CD was untouched. Swimming returned 1 silver and 2 bronze medals. Tom Daley added another bronze in the diving pool, but against sports like boxing, athletics, rowing and cycling, the swimmers had let the side down. What happened next was remarkable. This is Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy, where we meet the men and the women who run Olympic and Paralympic sport in the UK. I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and we're here in Loughborough, in a building that is home to cricket, netball, volleyball, basketball and swimming.
I'm Jack Buckner, Chief Exec of British Swimming.
And Jack, let's go back to London 2012 and that poor return that we highlighted. It happened not on your watch, before your time. So what was it like to take over an organisation that had transformed itself at an elite level quite rapidly, but then an organisation with expectation?
Yes, it happened quite quickly. I think you're absolutely right to point out 2012, which was quite a low point, and I think that caused British Swimming to have a sort of a long look in the mirror. And certainly the trials went really well, and then the Olympics were really disappointing. So I think it forced a change in strategy, which I think was really good. So the number of people getting on squads was tightened up. So the squads were tightened up, and it was given a much stronger kind of winning mindset with a clearer peaking strategy around major games. So some really good changes were made off the back of 2012. And hopefully we've got the foundations in place. Certainly Rio went well, and we'll probably come on and talk about that, but also hopefully we're in not a bad place for Tokyo, less than a year out.
And I talk about the Olympics and the poor return there, but the Paralympics was a pretty good return for British swimming. When you look at 2012, 39 medals, that was 10 more than athletics, 17 more than cycling. And that is, just give us an overview, part of your role, if you like. You've got elite swimmers at Olympic and Paralympic level. Is that the role of British swimming?
That's correct, yeah. So I cover all the aquatic disciplines, so swimming, diving, and also para-swimming. And I also cover disciplines that are unfunded by UK sport, which include water polo and high diving. And we've just luckily managed to pick up a bit of funding for artistic swimming, or synchro as it's now known, which we're pleased about.
And there's been a little bit of beef, shall we say, between some of the disciplines that you've mentioned there, with synchro and the swimmers having a little bit of a social media debate. It must be difficult to try and straddle all those disciplines, if you like.
It is, but at the same time it's fascinating. I've spent all my life in sport, in either big sports or smaller sports, so the issue of funding's always there, and what you're being measured against and the strategy UK sports taken. And I think what I really want is sport to be sustainable, so to try and find a way of getting clear on your strategy and then delivering against that, and then trying to use the funding appropriately. It doesn't always work like that, but it's a nice idea.
And you, the national governing body, as you say, for high performance, so it's not about participation.
No, we're similar to some other British bodies, a bit like British Athletics or UKA, where the home nation has been separate from the British body. Now, in my former job, I was triathlon, and I actually, for want of a better word, covered the journey in triathlon. So I covered both England and Britain. Whereas here, I've got, as it were, more of the elite sport, but I don't really go into participation. Although, as anyone will say in this space, partnership's the key. So, Swim England's in this building too. I've just had a meeting with them. And when you are separate organisations, it's really important to be joined up as best you can.
You mentioned about the triathlon. So you were appointed to British Swimming in May 2017 and you described it as a great opportunity. What was the first thing you changed?
Gosh, that's a good question. First thing I changed. I mean, I came in with some fairly tough stuff to get through in terms of paraswimming. So there'd been this independent inquiry and I had to get to grips with that fairly quickly. So I'd say probably the thing that I was most concerned about when I came in was that there was a bit of some legacy issues really from 2016, and so I did quite a bit of work just to kind of move that on and get a positive approach around paraswimming. So I'd say that was probably the first thing I walked into. And often with these jobs, you never quite know what you're going to walk into, and that was the thing I walked into. Probably there are other bigger things I've done which are maybe a bit less public, such as look at our event strategy and things like that. But that was the one I tackled head on.
Yeah, you kind of arrived at the organisation with this kind of growing storm. It wasn't just swimming storm, it was cycling, it was rowing, it was happening with bobsleigh as well around bullying. How important is it, how difficult is it to try and marry up this idea that we want to deliver medal moments and being able to push elite athletes at an Olympic and Paralympic level to a point, but not too far?
I think that's a hugely important and massively relevant question. And I think I spent my life in sport, and Olympic sport, Paralympic sport is appropriately the most demanding environment. You know, it asks more of you as an individual and the people around you, your families, the coaches, than anything else. So in that sense, it is, it's going to probably be one of the most demanding physical things you do in your life. So it puts a huge amount of pressure and strain on you as an individual and everyone around you. And as we also know, at the same time, the world has moved on. So how we treat and respond to people, how we think about their longer term health is also equally important. So I think it's tough. You have to make fine judgments within that about what's appropriate feedback, how to handle that. Most of the time, we get it right, I would say. And I've been in sports for 30, 40 years and seen it from all sorts of different angles. But I think on occasions it teeters too far. So it's trying to know where that line is between what's appropriate and what is appropriate level of challenge and what then shifts slightly and becomes inappropriate. And things that were appropriate, language, terminology, maybe 20, 30 years ago, are not appropriate now. So our coaches in particular have to be incredibly skilled, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on them often. They've got to make real fine judgments, and often any of us who've been in sport will know the moment you can probably give your most effective feedback is probably the moment of vulnerability. The moment you can really challenge someone is when maybe they've just failed or they're not going well. So how you give and receive feedback in that moment is also really important. So it's a fascinating area, and I think probably also the other aspect of that is this whole area of mental health, and we've probably done a better job in thinking about athletes' physical health than we have about the mental health. So we've got some catch up to do on that. But I think we're learning quite quickly, and also expectations change. So expectations, and I talk a lot to our coaches, and they the old style coaching model, when you told people what to do, doesn't work with young people. They want to be involved more in decision making, so that's challenging in itself. So how you move the teaching and methodology on as well is also really important.
Are you in a good place now, or is there still plenty to do?
I think we're doing all right. I'm actually pleased. I mean, this whole area of giving and receiving feedback. How you do that, particularly with people today, is moving incredibly quickly. And you look at all the research, and young people listen more to their peer groups and their teachers. So how you move all that on is actually quite hard. And on one hand, it's relevant for elite sport. It's also probably relevant for teaching in general, and it's relevant in club environments as well. So I think we're doing okay, but I think it's a new area for all of us, and we've got to be so aware of our responsibility in this area. So hopefully we're doing all right, but it's something I wouldn't want to take for granted, and I think it has wider implications beyond just elite sport.
One of the reasons why we wanted to do Great British Bosses was how people become CEOs and how they become chief execs. And when we spoke to Sarah Sutcliffe at Table Tennis England, she was a lawyer and then became a chief exec. As a former athlete, which you are, has that actually helped you being a chief exec with what you were just talking about relationships with the competitors?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I tend to see myself as what I call an insider-outsider. I think the danger with being from sport, which I'm from sport, is you become kind of stuck in the ways of thinking that have existed for a long time. And sport in many ways needs to change, and subject to various forces is changing. So what I tried to do in my career was, the core of it has been sport, as a competitor, then at Adidas, and then in sports governance. But I've always tried to keep that outsider perspective. So I was a NHS non-exec director. I'm a trustee of the National Forest. So I try and look at sport, but I try and keep, aware of, not everyone is within sport and looks at it the same way I do. So having that outsider perspective, I think, is really important too.
European gold, Commonwealth silver, world bronze. I mean, you were a world-class athlete in your own right. And were you a fan of swimming? Does it matter if you were such a big athletics performer that you can come in and run a sport that you haven't had experience of?
Well, I would describe myself as a fan of sport. Probably my favourite sport's cricket as well. So that's the sport I love. So I would say been a lifelong fan of sport. And I'm also a big fan of Olympic sport. So I love, I suppose I love being privileged enough to be in the presence of Olympians, and, the dedication, the perseverance, and, I look at our, Olympians or Paralympians, and in some ways you can see their eyes in the same place as I was when I was competing. So I love what the Olympics means, and the Paralympics too, how it's this massive thing every 4 years, and it's kind of a turning point in people's lives. So I hopefully I've got an empathy for the whole movement, and probably also I have admiration for individual sports, and obviously there's always a interesting dynamic between individual and team sports, but athletics is a very individual sport. Some ways swimming is, although it's got more team elements in some ways, and then triathlon was as well. So I would say above all else, I'm a fan of the movement.
It's different in every part of the world, but probably growing up, being an Olympic fan, you always think, as Michael said earlier, that swimming first week, athletics second week, they're the two big sports of the Olympics, and you've got experience of both of these now. When you were competing in the mid-'80s, drugs was kind of really forefront of athletics. And sadly, as we found in Doha, it hasn't really gone away. I want to talk about the swimming side of it in a moment, but from an athletics point of view, with your athletics hat on, how disappointing is it as a former athlete that we're still having the same battles?
Yeah, it is really. I mean, I think that's a huge question worth a podcast in its own right. It's a massive
We've
question.
done a few.
Yes, and I guess it is. It's really concerning. I think also, I've chatted to my former coach about this. I think also maybe I've always been a bit innocent and naive in these areas and seen the best in people. So you're always hopeful it'll go away. But I also think now, just the way technology and science has evolved, there's this kind of grey area, and between things that kind of don't feel right and are just within the rules. So in a way, I'm glad I suppose I didn't have to make some of the moral choices now, where you can do things which have a benefit in performance, but they don't feel quite right and things like that. So I do still worry and care desperately about it, and I'm really sad it's there. I do genuinely believe that the integrity unit being set up by the IAAF or World Athletics is a real genuine attempt to tackle that. And I think that we need more of that kind of thing, where you set up independent integrity units and you start to try and get almost third-party assessment and about what's right and wrong, because it is difficult and challenging. So I did care about it desperately, and hope that we can make progress on it.
And just quickly on that, are you saying that kind of athletes and athletics kind of organisers, they're kind of too close to it? You kind of need someone to look from it from afar.
Well, I think if you look at the setup of the IAAF Integrity Unit, that's what it's designed to do. It's meant to be an arm's length agency, I guess, as WADA is, and things like that. And I think sometimes, having those agencies, or it's like a kind of a ombudsman, or kind of a third party, try to look at these complex questions, because they are quite complex, some of these questions now, and the whole gender and all of that. It's some very complicated areas now, and I don't imagine they're going away. So I think having third-party agencies to look at that is probably the right way to go, because it's just really challenging, and often to keep up with things. And if you're an organisation that's primary role is to put on events and produce great championships and things like that, this whole other area of moral purpose is in itself, it's complicated.
You put yourself, when you're an athlete, at the forefront of the war on drugs, if you like. I've sat in press conferences ahead of things like the anniversary games, the World Championships, and seen athletes on the top table be asked questions about drugs in sport. And their body language suggests sometimes they're not interested. They roll their eyes at you. They don't want to talk about it. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm a world champion, if I'm a world record holder, and I feel I'm being cheated, or there's someone in my event that's cheating, I would be shouting it from the rooftops. Why do you think some of these athletes don't want to get involved in the conversation?
Well, it's another great question. So, I got very heavily involved at the time. This is back in the 80s, late 80s, and I was really concerned about blood doping. And at that time, blood doping was only detectable for blood tests, and blood tests were illegal in athletics. And I got to a point in my career where I just couldn't understand what was going on, and there were a whole group of runners, and their performances would suddenly improve, and I beat them one week, and literally a few weeks later they'd win major games medals, and it was just a bit like, what's going on here? And then the whole blood doping thing. So I did get heavily involved in it, and I got on the IAAF Athletes Commission, and I sort of got a bit campaigny about it. The problem for me was, at that point, it started to detract from my performance. And when you are an athlete, it's pretty one-dimensional. You get up and you train, and you clear your head of any other thoughts. And I find myself, doubting things, questioning things, and after a while, it started to eat away at me. So I think why those athletes at press conference you describe may not want to engage in the debate is they're focused on their own performance. And I was certainly someone who wasn't very good at having a political platform and an athletic performance platform, and they did start to compromise, and my performance definitely suffered, and that was a factor in that. So I think I can understand why people don't want to get in that debate, and to some extent, maybe it's the responsibility of us as administrators to drive that change on behalf of the athletes and that. So it's a chicken and an egg situation, really. I can understand why they don't, and I'm definitely a big advocate of things like athletes commissions now, and trying to give the athletes voice, that the appropriate sort of way of expressing itself. But often those individuals, when they're in the moment, that's what they do, and that's what they're good at doing. So they may not necessarily want to take on board that. So I kind of understand that as well.
So have you spoken, have you got a protocol? Is there a booklet somewhere that you've handed to Duncan Scott about what he did and the stand that he took in South Korea at the World Aquatic Championships against someone that he obviously perceives shouldn't have been on that podium?
Yeah, gosh, you're raising some good questions today. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we did. We were, first of all, I'm always supportive of my team, if you know what I mean. So the start point would be to be supportive of that. At the same time, when I was in the middle of all that, there was quite a lot of criticism from other quarters. And what I tried to work with FINA at that point in time was trying to channel that debate through athletes commissions and things like that. So we did actually, when all of that was going on, we talked to the team. The performance director talked to Duncan. We were very strongly supportive of him, At the same time, in a way, again, a bit like when I took a stand myself, if you take a stand, it doesn't actually always change the thing. It's probably takes, you need to engage in things like athletes' commissions and things like that. And then probably what I learned from taking a stand myself was that driving change in international sport takes time. So you have to work through the legislative process. You have to work through the international sports community. And if you really want to affect change in international sport, you have to work with the international community. And sometimes gestures we make don't necessarily land in the way you expect them to do in other countries for a variety of reasons. And so therefore, to really drive change, you have to kind of commit yourself to it over a long period of time, try and work through the commissions, push hard consistently. So I was very strongly supportive of Duncan and understand all of that. And of course, the Sun Yan hearings coming up are going to be live on CAS, so that'll be interesting to see. But I think there's ways you can drive change as well as making medal protests.
I think Seb Coe is learning that as well. How you internationally can change people's minds.
Yeah, Seb's done that. If you look, it's remarkable that having done what he did with the London Olympics, he then went on and went back into, as it were, international sport to world athletics. And it's demand. You can't always see things through your British lens. You have to see it through a European and then a global lens to try and drive change. And it's getting the right tone of voice around that's really important as well.
We've asked you some tough questions, so maybe a few easier ones for you. Why didn't you like apple farming in New Zealand?
Well, that was a good, that was my big lifestyle change.
It is a big lifestyle change.
It was a lifestyle change, yeah. So basically I was working at Adidas, and I got a really big job aged about 40, so I was marketing director for Adidas, which was an incredible job. In some ways it was a dream job, but I just found that really conflicted with a young family. So I did a very big lifestyle change, packed in my job at Adidas and bought an apple orchard in New Zealand. It was the sort of change you could have only made from America, and when it went badly wrong, which it did go badly wrong almost from day one.
The apples? Or
everything. It was like a bad Channel 4 documentary. Lost, out of place, didn't know what to do. I literally didn't know which way to turn. But all my British mates said, well, we knew that was going to happen. We always knew it was going to be a disaster. Why did you do it in the first place?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. And then, but at the time I was living on the west coast of America, and everybody kind of goes, yeah, live your dream. So I got this thing in my head. It seemed really exciting. It seemed a big lifestyle change. I get to see my family growing up. It was just seemed like, wow, this is amazing. But it was too big a change in my life. And I suddenly went from being Adidas marketing director to
failed apple farmer.
Yeah, pretty much. So it just was too big a change in my life. And I'm sure all of us go through points in our life when we think, what if? What about that? And that was definitely my moment. And I probably went too far away from who I was. It was a total disaster.
So back to swimming. Adam Peaty, how big a superstar is he and can be?
Well, I think Adam, when you look at it, in some ways, Adam's like the Usain Bolt. You know what I mean? When you look at, athletes or swimmers who've just dominated their event. And I mean, I could make a massively powerful argument why Adam Peaty ought to be Sports Personality of the Year this year. When you look at his performances, how he's redefined the event, it's extraordinary. I suspect, the British public will vote with Ben Stokes, and you see the reasons for that. So I think Adam is absolutely extraordinary, and his performances this year in Guangzhou were once again incredible. I hope he gets the accolades he deserves. Clearly, for anyone who competes in an Olympic sport, it's what you do in the Olympics that matters, and that's what you're kind of defined by. So I'm hoping that Adam can continue his extraordinary performances in through Tokyo, which would be amazing. But I do feel he's what he's done is he's redefined an event in a way that very few, great sports stars have. So he is incredible.
And I guess as well, he's kind of captured the public imagination, hasn't he? In the same way that we've had this 2-hour marathon, the project, if you like. Adam Peaty has had his project. He's one of your superstars. Tom Daley is another one of your superstars. But how do you manage Tom, and how does Tom manage having to be Mr. Saturday Night on the TV, but also winning medals at an Olympic elite level?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I've learned since I've been in this sport is how different swimming and diving is, and they're completely different. In some way, diving is as much about gymnastics as it is about swimming. And actually, a lot of the training, I think about 60% of the training is done on dry land. So it's a different type of sport. And also, I think it's more like gymnastics, a performance sport where you have to kind of present yourself. So the divers in themselves are performers in a way, there's a bit more sense of theatre around it. So I think it's an important part of their personality. And if you saw that wonderful thing the divers did in Turkey recently, that clip about the
Avengers
the
Assemble.
Avengers, yeah. But that's very divers, they're quite theatrical. They're thinking about the performance and how they look and the style, and they have to kind of strut their stuff a bit. So I think it's understanding that, whilst at the same time, making sure that the disciplines are there when they need to be there. So hopefully they'll get the balance right.
I've met Adam Peaty and interviewed him maybe half a dozen times. I don't envisage he's the type of personality that would be on Strictly Come Dancing or Celebrity X Factor until long after he's retired.
No, I don't think he would, actually. I think he's very much, I guess, what you call in the zone. He's absolutely... And I spoke to him a couple of weeks before Guangzhou, and I met a lot of phenomenal athletes in my time, and he was up there in terms of athletes who've got that look. And I remember seeing that look in the eyes of Daley Thompson or Alistair Brownlee or Sebastian Coe or Steve Cram or some of these people who are the archetypal great British sports people, where you're almost irrelevant, and you feel that look when they're looking at you, they're talking to you, but actually they're not really talking to you. They're just not bothered, and I get that completely. I think
Glad it wasn't just me then.
No, it wasn't just you. It wasn't just you. It's sort of like
half a dozen times. That's exactly how I felt every time.
Yes, exactly. And they do the thing, but there's something ticking away in their heads, and I can remember that again. That look I've seen in, say, Alistair Brownlee or Alistair and Johnny at points in time, talking to them, and then also exactly the same going back with some of the people I was lucky enough to run against, and they're at the point in their lives where nothing else matters, and in a funny sort of way, no one else matters. Although they wouldn't necessarily say that to you, or they might do, but it's that kind of real in the zone moment. So yeah.
How proud are you of Alice Tai and the guys putting on the para swimming World Championships, which London stepped up for, with literally 6 months' notice?
That was an amazing project. Yeah, something. It's fairly recent, but it was just wonderful to be involved in it, and I'm so. It was just wonderful, really. It was just great to do it, and we made a lot of decisions quite quickly, and I was really pleased with it. I mean, it was interesting because I've got a background in the commercial sector, Adidas, and in that commercial sector, you tend to make quicker decisions, and you're less inclusive in your decision-making process, whereas a lot of the projects I do now, multiple stakeholders, and what I tried to do in that project was get the balance right between making quick decisions but also engaging stakeholders. So I'm really pleased with the way it worked. I mean, we had some incredible stakeholders. London were amazing, UK Sport were amazing, the IPC, the athletes, everyone, but we did have to make a lot of decisions pretty quickly in tight timelines, and whether it was branding or decisions around the venue or events, it was fantastic. It was great. Yeah, it was definitely a highlight of the year.
And just a quick word on Alice, what she can do at the Paralympics?
Yeah, Alice is absolutely up there again. And going back to that, Alice is, we met with Alice at the end of the season, had a good chat with her, and she's another phenomenal individual, and she's still young, and she's independent and strong and passionate about para sport. And yes, I think almost there's also in a way that positive naivety where she's focused on the sport and she maybe doesn't appreciate what she might become. And I think some of the risks will be around making sure she's got the right support around her to achieve everything she wants to achieve, in the pool and outside the pool. But she's absolutely got the talent and ability, and we're lucky it's not just her, it's a really strong team. And one of the highlights of those championships wasn't just her performances of the whole team and another generation sort of coming through.
And final one for me, best Olympics in 100 years in Rio. Can you match that swimming-wise in Tokyo?
I hope so. I mean, you never know. I hope so. I mean, I think a lot of the building blocks are there, and when you looked at the World Championship this year, we did pretty well there, but we felt we left some medals there. So the team have made some good decisions. I'm pleased with the way we move things on. So I'm optimistic we've moved things on. I like the way the performance program's developed. Coach is great. Same with the diving. It feels like there's still work to do, and it feels like everyone involved in the sport has got that sense. So yeah, I mean, you never know in elite sport. And there were a lot. I can't remember the number of fourths we had in Rio, but there were a fair number of them there. So I think there's more to come.
Jack Buckner, Chief Executive of British Swimming, thank you for speaking to great British bosses from Anything But Footy.
Thank you very much.